Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to the 11th module in the series Marketing Management, a VUCA perspective, a course where we are covering the fundamentals of marketing management, and I am your friend and your guide through the entire process, Siddhi Bhattacharya. When you listen to words of somebody who's a profound writer like Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote about feminism and a lot of various things that inspire the human condition, they put us in a certain situation where we think and we react to certain stimuli from outside. You would hear from her that she says, buying is a profound pleasure. It covers a lot of aspects in our minds where we find gaps. And those gaps are answered by us buying of products or buying into ideas. Today, we are going to probe that exact particular journey, the contentment of a purchase or why people buy. Why all marketing needs to land at buying as the end game of whatever we do as marketers. In order to effect this one crucial act that is the fuel of all business, marketing must understand and it must evoke purchasing as the primary activity that it supports, because at the end of the day, that is what makes the products fly off the shelves and help get revenue, which funds the goings on of the organization. Today's conversation is about how people buy and the decision flow when it comes to purchasing things. And the most important thing which we were discussing the previous time around and which follows here as well is how memory, because all our experiences, all our interactions, all the way we have interacted with stimuli in the past lead us to certain pockets of memory. And these pockets of memory are the ones which affect how we take certain decisions to purchase or discard certain purchases in our purchase journey. Memory is the brain's ability to record, store, and retrieve information, because we make our decisions basis all the information we have stored away for a different day where we are going to use it. And the events that actually happen, and these events are where all these instances are created and how we store them. This plays a role in consumers' purchasing decisions, and different types of memory and way memory processes work and described in the following sections. You will see how memory plays a role in defining how purchases will happen. Psychologists, cognitive psychologists specifically, distinguish between short-term memory, a temporary and limited repository of information, and long-term memory, which is a more permanent and potentially unlimited repository. So these are the kinds of things where you will understand how the brain prioritizes certain pieces of information vis-a-vis other items which it discards. All of this information and experiences that we have, they get encoded, and these go on throughout life and can end up as our long-term memory. So this is how we start with the approach to the purchasing decision. And in order to understand how memory and decisions work, we need to understand how different kinds of memory constructs of how we put certain things in a framework at our workplace and how these affect making our choices is something we'll delve into in our conversation today. There are various kinds of memories, like we just discussed. There is short-term memory and then there is long-term memory. And the three types of long-term memory are again an expansion into the varieties of kinds of memory that we create over our learned experiences across all the time that we spend with them. So there is episodic memory. Here, personal events tied to time, place, and emotions are taken into consideration, where you get to see certain things. For example, if you're going from home to your place of work, the route you take, the way you look at the particular landmarks, the kind of traffic you face on a day-to-day basis, it gives you an episodic memory, and it helps you choose which particular route to take when you see that there is possibility of a traffic snarl up ahead. Then there is semantic memory. This is general knowledge, and this contains facts, meanings, concepts, things that if once learnt, you set into your daily pattern. You don't need to learn every day how to brush. You don't need to learn every day how to comb your hair. These are facts, these are concepts which once you've learned, you are able to utilize without having to give too much effort to. And then there is procedural memory. This, for example, is like riding a bike. It is more complex than what semantic memory is. So, semantic memory, when you're speaking, when you and I are having a conversation in a certain language, it gives you the basic understanding so that what I say, you are able to understand. Whereas procedural memory is something which you can utilize on a day-to-day basis to complete certain specified tasks. Once you are completely capable and are adept at doing that particular task, you don't need to apply your brain power to get that particular task done. And these are done through repetition. Now, the earlier task of episodic memory also can get into procedural memory, especially if you are in the act of driving a lot throughout the day. So, if you're driving, for example, cab drivers, chauffeurs, people who are in the logistics workplace, they understand which routes to take, how to avoid traffic, how to gauge whether traffic is increasing on your intended path, and they're able to preempt that and take certain decisions much before other people can react to certain stimuli like that. By association, inside of a network, our brain is a whole network of neurons, and with associations, we network the information that we find and we create a memory model. This is known as the associative network memory model. This gives structure to the memory that we create. So, long-term memory consists of nodes. Nodes are locations in our brain where we store certain information, and we link these with different connections to other known and unknown sources of information. The links that we create, they vary in strength. They become very strong memories or they become weak memories depending on the kind of associations with them. If certain things have more items in support of it, for example, if there is a certain instance where you felt nice, you may remember the aroma, you may remember the visuals, you may remember the mood, you may remember the sensation on your skin. Many factors are memorized, and because of which that particular item becomes a very strong memory, and there are lots of associations with it. This memory is activated when the nodes are exposed to external information which require it to bring that particular piece of memory back, and you recall the concepts that you've already gone through in the past. When nodes are strongly associated together, they activate, enhancing the kind of recall, the detail into which you can get into for that particular instance. So, the number of stimuli that the brain is able to store for an instance and the way it is structured, the way these instances are related, helps you define that particular scene moment in your memory, and you're able to recall it in much fuller detail as you go along. Elements that affect our memory when it comes to marketing, etc., are things like brand associations. Now, brands also act like entities, they also act like people in our day-to-day life. They also exhibit a certain kind of persona, they have certain outer stimuli which they give out, and people identify with those particular external stimuli. There are thoughts, there are feelings, there are perceptions and beliefs which are linked to a brand and the kind of experience that you gain out of that particular brand. You can take an example in sports. Adidas evokes the sporty nature of things. There is fitness because the brand ambassador Messi comes into play. You recall Messi, you get the associations with excellent soccer or football, as you want to call it, being played. And at the same point in time, you also tend to remember competing brands. For example, Nike, for example, Puma. So the entire ecosystem comes to your mind. You remember all of these facets, and this happens effortlessly. The strength of the association defines how well you are able to remember and recall that particular association. Why this is important for marketers is that, like we discussed, the strength of the memory, how favorable you find that one particular brand in that particular memory system, and the uniqueness of the associations, which give one particular brand a better stance against the other competition. This helps shape the customer recall and the brand's positioning. How well does the customer relate with that particular brand? Do they find themselves closer to it vis-a-vis other competitive brands with whatever stimuli based leaning and whatever their associations they've built in their own minds? If that keeps happening, the brand finds favor with that particular consumer, and the consumer tends to veer towards a purchase whenever it comes to that particular space. So sports as a space, maybe you're buying shoes, maybe you're buying jackets, maybe you're buying wristbands, maybe you're buying a headband, maybe you're buying into a certain sporting event, and there the sponsor is the one which is of your choice. So you will tend to veer towards those particular instances in a much more directed and a much more supportive kind of way. You may choose to go to a sporting event, which is, if you're a Nike fan, you may choose to go to one which is supported by Adidas, but only because you are interested in that sport, not because Adidas and not Nike is sponsoring it. But a Nike sponsored event may push you closer, make the chances higher of you participating in that particular event if Nike is your brand of choice. In this case, the role of marketing increases. How? Marketing creates and reinforces the experiences. You need to have desirable brand knowledge structures. So, the more the brand knowledge structures are created and the more they are reinforced, that helps marketing to create that necessary environment in which people remember those particular brands, the experiences that they give out, and the knowledge of those particular brands, so that consumers veer towards those particular brands, towards the experiences, towards buying the products that carry the brand on them. There's a nice example here. Procter and Gamble uses association maps. These are structures in which you can create one particular model of how people associate things. We'll study these association maps and other models going further, and they get evaluation triggers. So, if you are able to create a certain point in the consumer psyche where consumers feel, hey, this is one reason for me to buy into that brand. I needed a shoe. This brand is offering me a new kind of shoe which fits my needs, or this brand is always what I wanted to buy, and right now it is giving me a loyalty discount. It will automatically trigger in the consumer's mind the need to actually spend and buy that particular piece of apparel. It at times could be because of design also, could be colors also, could be range, could be a variety of factors, but at the core of all of these things stands the brand itself. And therefore, the strength of brand connections is something which is used by brand marketers in order to engage consumers and create that association, so that when they want and are willing to engage with the consumers also reciprocate and buy into the brand. How memory constructs work and how access is a part of the entire scenario. First, let's understand the nature of memory. Memory is not exact, it will never be precise, it will be a mix of what is factual, a mix of the information, and how the brain has processed and created a narrative around it and stored it for its personal use. This narrative may differ from individual to individual, but the number of tenets that you are able to drive from the brand side and get consumers to accept and retain that information gives you the strength of common knowledge, and that common knowledge the better it is, the wider it is, you'll get a bigger number of followers who believe in the exact same thing, which therefore goes on to foster what we've already discussed in the previous conversations, your own brand tribe. So we recall fragments and we fill in the gaps. These gaps are the narratives which the brain creates and fills in. And so therefore, we have to ensure that the gaps are reduced and the fragments are maximized. So there are less of fragments and more whole pieces of information. This is how it gets encoded, and so therefore it also aids the retrieval process of the information when the brain demands to remember whatever it has stored. Memory encoding works by, it's basically a process by information is stored in memory, and therefore the parts of it are, first is depth of processing. So meaningful thinking, it strengthens the association. So if there is something which consumers rhyme and reason with, it gives them meaning, and so therefore they remember it better. That is the depth of processing. And the second part is connections, where you associate new information with existing memory and therefore improve retention, because the more number of nodes that are created in your brain, the better you remember a certain item of information. So that is typically how the brain is supported in this entire exercise, by encoding. And which is why if you start knowing something new about a particular brand or its products or the association it has or the campaigns which it is launching, over time what you will find is there is always a freshness of conversation. It is not stale news. It is not a joke that you've heard many times over. It is fresh. It is new. And so therefore people, the consumers, they feel that there is always something interesting going on with that particular choice of brand that they have. And so therefore they want to learn more. We've already talked about curiosity in the previous conversations. So curiosity gets activated. People want to learn more. People want to gather the information that is there, the new pieces of information. And not only do they engage with the brand, they also engage laterally within the community that is part of the brand's outreach. So therefore, amongst the community members, the tribe members, they interact and they figure out their own narrative. Part of it is obviously co-created, because they may find certain gaps which they want to fill the way they would like to see it. So there is always collaboration from the consumer side. Now, once you've encoded the piece of information you wanted within the consumer's mind, there is the retrieval aspect, because now you're throwing a stimulus and asking the consumer to remember it and use it. So here you're reclaiming stored information, and here the information has to be durable first and foremost. You have to ensure that once stored, it is long-term memory, and so therefore it is highly durable. The second part is you have to give them cues. The cues are proper reminders. So product packaging, the shape, the size, the color, the brand logo itself, these things are reminders that this is something I know, this is something I trust, this is something I believe in. In-store displays, the way they are structured, also are part of that entire memory construct. And these enhance recall as the consumer keeps looking at them, and that trust and faith in that particular brand keeps getting entrenched every single time there is an interaction of this sort. Even if they don't buy, they remember, hey, my trusted brand looks like this, it is placed here, it is not gone away, it has not disappeared into the night. Great. I am lucky. I am feeling relaxed, because tomorrow if I need it, it's always there for me to purchase. Then we talk about interference. Here, competing information can cause confusion and it can also overshadow certain details. This is where the act of disruption actually shakes the consumer's belief system. And this is what all brands which are competing in that particular ecosystem, in that particular space, they keep trying to do this. This is done through communication, and the better the disruption, the more chances that it will actually wean a certain number of people away from the tribe. This is eating into the other brand's market share. So all of these aspects are part of the conversation drive which competitors keep doing and brands keep fighting and vying for. So what are the implications of memory for marketing? The first thing is in-store marketing. When you're in store, your packaging, your mini billboards, all the standees, all the danglers, all the wobblers that you see put on furniture here and there, they trigger these encoded memories. And if the consumer is in need of that particular brand at that point in time, it pushes them to put one of the items into the shopping cart. Then there is accessibility of the brand. Here, top of mind recall, it helps brands benefit, and it also gives certain edge when it comes to word of mouth. One consumer recommending the brand to another consumer gives a lot of weightage, because when one is recommending to the other, it happens that here it is not the brand which is coming and pushing the agenda. It is somebody who's just like me or just like you, and that person is telling me. So it becomes automatically far more believable, because we feel and we see that somebody else has benefited from using that particular brand or product, and so therefore it's worth giving a try, if not completely taking on head on. Now, there's a factor called selective retention. This is something which comes into light when consumers remember positive aspects of preferred brands and forget the negatives or competitor advantages, because they're already biased. Their like is already there for the brand of their choice. So, therefore, that aspect comes into play here, and you have selective retention, which actually pushes and heightens the reason why a consumer will buy a certain brand over its competition. And this is the key cornerstone of brand loyalty from the consumer side. So, there is a fairly streamlined buying decision process, and we will understand that buying decision process in further detail here. This is to understand how the human mind uses memory and whatever logic it applies, and therefore it takes a call. It takes a call to buy into or buy off a certain product or brand. The stages to this are: first, there is a problem, the human problem, which we have discussed previously as well. When that problem is something which the consumer recognizes, at times it's also a latent problem. People do not realize they have a problem. So, marketing's role comes in and helps them put that particular problem into words. It helps them classify it, give it a certain shape and definition, and so therefore people can now understand, okay, this is what it means, this is what the problem I'm grappling with is, and so therefore how do I deal with that particular problem, how do I come and get around it, I overcome it. So therefore ways to do it is through information search, where I'm looking for certain aspects that can give me either more detailed ways to understand what the problem is, or it gives me a response in terms of who has already solved that problem, and so therefore I can get my inputs from them. Then once you've got the alternatives in play, you actually start evaluating which alternative is best suited for you, both in terms of effort, in terms of pricing, in terms of various other factors that your mind may hold important to that situation. And then once you've zeroed in on who you are going with, that is when the purchase decision happens. But yes, that is not where it stops. See, communication is not a one-way street. Communication is always a two-way street. It goes forward and then comes back in the form of feedback. Precisely the same thing, because this also rides the communication model. So therefore, there has to be feedback, and that feedback comes in the form of reviews, in the form of consumer testaments, and a variety of other inputs that come away from consumers having used that particular product. So therefore, you got post-purchase behavior. You may have buyer's remorse, you may have buyer's delight. Whichever way it swings, that post-purchase behavior is the expression that becomes the feedback mechanism. So this is the feedback, which can, once taken, help marketing in putting in better inputs in all these stages. It can also in fact help create avenues for better purchase also at the point of sale and various other ways. Now going forward, the top questions which a consumer is thinking of when taking that particular decision. Who? So who buys, decides and influences the purchase? This is something, if once marketing knows, can get the right kind of consumer. So therefore, your segmentation of that particular larger audience and getting to know the actual real consumer who is going to buy your product and what are their roles in that particular decision process. Then what? Therefore, what needs do they have and how are those needs satisfied and what benefits are they seeking, so that we can answer and replenish those benefits. The why. There is a certain reason for you to buy into something. So, what are those reasons is something which helps a brand market itself better. Where and when, because there has to be a topicality, there has to be a seasonality, there has to be an occasion to buy that particular brand. There has to be a certain sequence or a certain specific event. So, therefore, whether it is purchased online, whether it is purchased offline, the seasonal factors, what else forms the timing aspect of it. So, where, location, when, timing, both these factors come into play. And then how? How does it affect the consumer? So, therefore, the product perception, that how does it help me, what kind of items that I'm looking at help me take that particular decision in favor of the brand, and the customer's attitudes, whether I'm interested, whether I'm just buying it because it's part of muscle memory, what is it? And does it have an impact on the lifestyle, the social lifestyle, the personal attributes? Is there a demographic attribute which is there? And am I allowed to buy it? So, do I have enough money, the economic factors? So, these are all the factors of how, which affect the entire decision process from the consumer side. So, if you are to understand the buying decision process, this you will get to learn in the learning, the choosing, the using, and the disposing of whatever products are being bought. And these consumer decision journeys are non-linear. It's not a straight line, but yes, that process showcases to you the various facets of what keeps happening in the entire consumer decision and iteration process. You may at times not complete the journey and go back from stage number 3 to stage number 1 or 2. And then only when you're convinced do you actually go and make the actual purchase. So, this is non-linear and it is an iterative process. Again, it is influenced by new information at each stage. If the information is in favor of the brand, it pushes the consumer a step closer. If it is not, it may distance the consumer a bit. And marketers must reach consumers across these multiple touch points, which is something we've also spoken of as 360-degree communication. We've also talked of it as integrated marketing communications. These are things you'll learn later. And also by the presence and being there in all sorts of media and all sorts of formats and having the same message going across, where we cover omni-channel. There are various ways to approach this and various facets which marketers need to understand. But these are three critical keywords which need to be kept in mind by the marketer, because these are aspects of how marketing can be used for the brand to reach a particular consumer in a consistent way and give them the right kind of message that helps them buy that particular brand. Now, the 5 stages of the decision process, like we discussed earlier, you recognize what the problem is, you look for an answer to that problem, or you look for people who are solving that problem for you. Then once you've got the alternatives, you evaluate which particular alternatives are in your favor. Then you pick up the particular product. So, you evaluate alternatives, then you pick up the product. And finally, once you've done that purchase, you've paid money, you've got the product home, you're using it, then you react as to how much or how less it found favor with whatever you had thought of it. What you expected and what came of it is your post-purchase behavior. And there could be a certain amount of skipping and reversing of these stages depending on how much you are invested in that particular product and also what kind of new information comes your way. So, like we discussed, if certain drastic changes in pricing happen, that could reverse a certain decision in favor of competition. So, competition which suddenly slashes prices may actually push people to buy into that, but only for an interim bit. On the alternative side, if it is a very high value product, a sudden slashing of prices may actually push people away because people may think there is something wrong with it. That is why they are giving it for so cheap. Maybe people will not turn up. And so therefore, it is a double-edged sword. People need to be aware what they're going to do with that particular item. Marketers also need to be aware of this. And then there are things which are routine purchases. For example, toothpaste, you don't even apply your brain. So this you have to just pick up as almost like a commodity, and this may bypass a lot of stages here. So there is hardly any problem recognition or something. You need toothpaste when you're in the shopping aisle or when you're surfing for it online on the store. You just pop one in because you're running out of it. Whatever brand comes in, you find the price to be right. That's it. That's the decision. It's taken. So these are parts of the decision process, and like we discussed, these could be skipped, these could be reversed with new information coming your way, but it has these aspects: the problem, the information search, the alternative evaluation, the purchase decision itself, and post-purchase behavior. Now, marketers need to align their strategies with a variety of consumer touchpoints across all stages, which is what we discussed in the previous couple of slides, the omni-channel, the integrated marketing aspects. They also need to focus on high involvement products for a complete journey. Why? Because whatever has high involvement, whether you're buying into a camera, for example, you need to know all technical specifications of a high-end camera before you actually make the price-based decision. There are functional aspects, there are psychological aspects, because if you're part of an amateur club, who are people next to you who are going to be also taking photographs? Do you align with them? If you're part of a professional club, what kind of pictures can you achieve with that particular camera? Will people appreciate the work that you've done basis the equipment you have? Then there are monetary risks also. Let's say you buy a camera, but the lens turns out not that effective as per your choice. What happens then? You're not able to produce the kind of photography that you would like to. So people adjust their approaches for a calculated and less structured decision making process, and that is also something brands need to understand. They adjust this with the inputs that are coming, which is why the communities become important, which is why word of mouth is such a strong support system which all brands vie for. If consumer to consumer conversations help push the brand in front of people, higher are the chances of people actually opting for that particular brand. In terms of the problem recognition, the first is that I have to recognize that there is a certain need. So that need recognition needs to come in first. Here, buyers begin to understand what their problem really is. If it is not well constructed, brands need to tell them. Then there are internal stimuli. For example, basic needs like hunger, thirst, etc., which drive a threshold. And once they reach that threshold, you must have it. So hence it creates that need. Then there are external stimuli where ads, peer admiration, etc., are factors which may drive your need, but that need gets certain time before it develops fully into desire. Then there are key need drivers. So natural depletion. Here you are replacing frequently used and depleting items like toothpaste. There is dissatisfaction where you're using, and this is that post-purchase behavior aspect coming into play. So you're using something, you're feeling that it is not doing the job it was intended to, so you're seeking alternatives. Then there are lifestyle goals. So you may have moved up in the social ladder. When you do that, these events will actually require you to buy certain things. Also, events like childbirth, promotions, these will influence your habits. Again, your peers, your circle, your society around you, they will play a role, and also the competition. So if there is something which the competition is offering and has now also been offered by your brand of choice, you'll want to keep going with your brand of choice, but just tip it and show that, hey, I have got something which is equal to the competition, maybe even better. And it also satisfies me to go with that brand which I have always trusted and favored. Then there are marketing implications. So you identify the triggers for specific needs via consumer insights. You understand where consumers think of that particular purchase decision, what prompts them to. And so therefore you develop campaigns that spark interest, and then you motivate that particular consideration, especially for discretionary purchases. For example, you are buying a new perfume, you're buying jewelry, you're going on an expensive vacay. All of these things require a certain amount to be spent. Hence, it has to measure up to not only the logical aspects but also the emotional draw out of that entire purchase. It should feel good. It should feel satisfactory that yes, you've done the right thing. That consideration of the consumer mentally patting themselves on the back for their decision is something which the brand needs to promote all the while. In terms of information search, what kind of information does consumer look for? They look for something which is limited at times, because most consumers explore one store or one brand and they look at durables, appliances, and then they're done with their search. At times people go into a lot more detail, and here this is to such state where you've got heightened attention. So they are receptive to product info. They are planning, for example, they're planning a meal. So they keep looking at a certain restaurant's menu and they're looking at certain other menus, etc., to figure out something which fits their keto or no carb diet, etc. Then there is active search. Here, people are reading, they're actually consuming online research, they're visiting stores, not yet taking that particular decision. And typically, this happens in high end, high net purchase environments. So maybe if you're buying a car at that point in time, you may get into this kind of an assessment. And major information sources also come into play. So you've got personal sources like friends, family, and acquaintances, commercials, which are ads, websites, emails, and other formats of communication coming your way. Even packaging at times works as a communication piece. Then there is public information. So you've got mass and social media, independent reviews, the testimonials that you will find on the internet, etc. And then there is experiential, where you directly interact with. So like a test drive of a car is a direct interaction. This is experiential in nature. And then finally, as a result of all of these interactions, there is a key insight where there are personal or public sources that often provide more influential than commercial ones. They provide that particular piece of information which suddenly gives a light bulb moment to the consumer. For example, if consumers, when buying a car, were thinking only of the mileage, and suddenly the NCAP rating picks up and talks about safety of passengers in a big way, people suddenly realize that, hey, this is important and maybe more than just the fuel aspects. And so therefore their decision veers towards a brand which offers that particular kind of benefit. So all of these factors start playing in the consumer's mind, and that drives the kind of decision making, and maybe switches also in the decision. So they may switch brands, they may switch their intended purchase to a completely different brand or product. Again, in terms of information search, you've got dynamics of the search itself and consumer sets. Different consumer sets look for different pieces of information. When actually doing a search, consumers go from the total set of brands to ones that they are aware of, and then amongst those they also further funnel it down to the ones that they would consider buying into, amongst which then you will finally get a choice set. Amongst these particular ones which are their choice set, you will finally end up purchasing one. So that entire funneling exercise is the search pathway. Starts broad, ends very, very thin and unitary at the end point. So therefore, there is market partitioning. Consumers prioritize the attributes, for example, the price, the type of product they are buying into, the brand value and the prestige alongside it. And the kind of attribute hierarchy that we see here reveals buyer segments. Here again, economics, the demography, the geography, a variety of factors starts to play in. And so therefore, there are certain markets which are price dominant and certain ones which are brand dominant, depending on the net worth of that particular item that is being purchased. Now, there are role of digital recommendations as well. You've got personalization which comes into play. Amazon, for example, uses an algorithm that suggests relevant product basis purchase patterns. They have got a certain history of each individual customer, and so therefore basis that particular history, they are able to suggest that, hey, you bought this frequently, alongside this there are other items that people like you have purchased. Gives the insight of what has been brought in a package deal, maybe they offer a discount as well. And because of this, it may actually increase sales and reduce the delivery cost because you are providing it one time in one particular delivery cost, but you're actually selling 3 items there. So it is profitable for Amazon as well. And there has been significant impact of this. So over a third of Amazon sales comes from such recommendations as well. There is historical proof that this works in the marketer's favor. Again, strategically, how do? You place certain items. For example, the product arrangement. Whether you are arranging by brand or flavor, this influences people's choices. So if you're putting a certain brand on the shelf at eye level, which is the highest viewed shelf in a retail environment, that automatically warrants the kind of rent which that particular retail will charge from the brand as such. Then there are competitive insights for competitors in the consumer's choice set, and then source evaluation. So if consumers learn which particular brands are going to talk to them, they will optimize the campaigns so that the campaigns meet the expectations and the disposition. We've already talked about the search aspect. So while this is search, so what happens is when you're searching, you already have disclosed as a consumer that you have a certain disposition. A disposition means that you're already looking, you're active in your search for a certain particular product or a brand. So therefore, using that particular disposition, what can happen is your source can be evaluated and consumers can learn about the brands because the campaigns are optimized to meet needs of consumers who are already actively searching. When you're evaluating, the first thing that comes into mind is the belief and attitude as a consumer which they carry. And beliefs are convictions about truth or reality, and these influence the choices. Attitudes could be a variety of things like frame of mind, and these are consistent towards behavior towards objects. Then there are hard to change and hard to adapt products, and this also is because where attitudes already are there in place. The key insight here is that attitudes form during product trials and they predict behavior better than those from the ads that they have seen. Again, information processing in consumer decisions happens when you're evaluating. So, you're satisfying needs by providing certain benefits, and the products which are bundles of attributes, for example, price, quality, features, all which are weighing in together may actually push the consumer towards a purchase. At the same point in time, focus on attributes delivering key benefits for that particular audience segment is something which is going to push them closer towards the purchase. The more number of choices you give necessarily does not mean that you will get better outcomes. It also has to be the simplicity to get to that point where the insight of the consumer is met. So therefore, marketers must reduce the choice overload. How? They give superior options, which takes away the entire competitive edge of anybody else who's in the space. You streamline the information so that people understand it stage by stage, and in the hierarchy that they are, their beliefs, attitudes, etc., help them to process that information. And you also put in a certain amount of urgency, last offer, few stocks remaining, etc. So all these things are leveraging the time sensitive promotions also, which give people a reason and compel them to buy sooner than later. Then there is an expectancy value model where the decision framework comes where consumers rate the brands on these attitudes, and because of the rating, other consumers see it and they like or dislike that particular brand or product. The weight is assigned to each attribute by marketers to understand how the consumer assesses it in their mind. For example, if you've got a laptop which you are going to purchase, you're going to look for what laptop memory first, because that is something which is important when you're using that particular laptop. If you've got graphics heavy work, then you want to give it that certain amount of weight. Usage wise, if you're going to carry it around, the size and weight, and finally probably the price. These are probably ways the weight of that particular consideration is taken on. So when the laptop, which amongst your consideration set, scores a perceived value of 8.0, that probably has a higher chance of getting sold. Be a laptop which has probably got a rating of 5 or 6. Now, the strategic application for marketers here is they can redesign products themselves and improve on the scores on each of these aspects. Once they derive that, they can actually push the communication of benefits which they have achieved with that product redesign out there for consumers to understand. And you can compare this with how your competitors are doing in that same particular category, etc. And you can reframe the importance of how the certain strengths are aligned with the consumer priorities. The insight that you've got that consumer wants a certain kind of memory capability in a laptop will help you align that as the first. You lead with that particular piece of information so that the consumer is more aligned to buying into your particular product. At the purchase decision, there are certain decisions which are taken by thinking through, and there are certain aspects which are heuristic. Heuristic means you take it without even having thought through it. So the purchase decisions are brand, your channel, your quantity, the timing, and the payment method. And in terms of decision heuristics, you've got mental shortcuts which simplify the complex decisions, compensatory models where you've got negatives being offset by positive attributes. For example, higher price, if it's there on that laptop we thought of, but it gives you automatically better features, you allow for that particular instance to be also considered. Then there are certain non-compensatory models where attributes are evaluated in isolation. So price here may not be the one, but if there are different choices possible which set it apart from everything else that is offered in that category, this will provoke deeper deliberation. For example, if there is a certain personalization aspect which you've added, that is not being offered by anybody else. That personalization will require the consumer to think of it in a far more deeper way. Again, in terms of choice architecture, and you are pushing the people into that particular decision model, you're getting the decisions by structuring the environment. For example, if you're giving 100-calorie snack packs, you're nudging people to take healthier choices. Similarly, when there are factors which are influencing the heuristics, you have to quickly pick up food, and on the run to office, you're going to finish it off. So you're doing multitasking. So there's a time pressure. If you know of a certain brand which is dependable when it comes to that kind of food and energy bars, for example, that brand knowledge helps. And if your colleagues are also doing something similar, then that social context makes you feel part of the crowd, makes you feel that this is okay as behavior. So that also brings in acceptability, and not only of the product but also of the brand. In terms of involvement, if you've got high involvement, you see rational evaluation of core product attributes. If you've got high involvement, you again see that it requires people to be motivated. There has to be a certain ability and opportunity for the purchase to happen. Low involvement is more heuristic in nature, and this can be triggered by external cues. You can have celebrity endorsement. For example, Lux has always used film stars for selling soaps. And packaging. So there is a certain kind and defined way of doing the packaging. Coca-Cola bottles look the same all across the world. And this is common for low cost, frequently purchased products. Increased involvement for low involvement products is also there because you have to constantly keep reminding people that toothpaste means this particular brand, toothpaste means this particular brand's variant, etc. So toothpaste and cavity prevention, I solve that, buy me as a brand. Similarly, personal situations, for example, fortified drinks, drink this and your bones will grow stronger. Again, you have to push aspects like heart health. So, heart healthy cereals like a certain brand of cornflakes will be better for you. Again, meaningful features for advanced light bulbs. You've got voice controlled Internet of Things based light bulbs nowadays, which are better for your usage overall. Again, you've got attitudes of other people also coming into that particular relationship where it pushes the decision, and your situational considerations. For example, if you've got a job loss, you want to save and not buy certain things. If you've got an urgency of reaching somewhere, you will have other needs you are catering to. This particular decision should be a snap decision. So those aspects come into play. Again, there are perceived risks and the mitigation of the risks. So if there is a functional risk, like I take this on and it doesn't work, then what happens? Physical risk. Am I capable of doing something with that particular product I have bought? Financial. Can I pay for it? Social. Will I be accepted if I do this? And psychological. Will I be happy doing this? And even the opportunity. is there something else I could have done, but I've done this instead? So is that a risk I'm willing to take? So there are various kinds of information, national brands, warranties, trusted recommendations based ways of reducing these risks which brands incorporate into their communication. So this is how the decision flows. You've got all the alternatives, you evaluate them, and then with your purchase intent, you look at situational factors and you look at opinions of others, and you finally arrive at your purchase decision. So a worked out example here is, let's say you were buying a mobile phone. So you've got a total set of brands which offer mobile phones. You are aware of these four. Then you consider these three, because these three you think are going to meet your status as a certain kind of individual. Of these, your choice is these two, but because of certain features, the brand value, etc., you finally end up choosing one. So this is typically a worked out example of how from the total set it funnels down to the brand of choice. Post purchase, you may actually show dissonance on your purchase or satisfaction based on how your product's performance is relative to your expectation. So product's performance can be viewed in many ways, and it can also help repeat purchases of a certain brand. You can push that brand again as an advocate, and dissatisfaction can lead to returns, complaints, negative reviews, and such like. So marketers must reinforce these positions and ensure that if there are any grievances, these are dealt with properly and promptly. And this will provide clear instructions for how you use that particular product, how you dispose of it, then enhance the satisfaction by including a celebrating customers' choices, and then you got going to get feedback by asking from the consumer. You're going to ask them that, hey, is this going to be of use to you, etc. So all of these aspects are there, and there are helpful updates and subscription services which can increase the likelihood of people sticking with that particular product. So a lot of product based usage indicators come into play, the promotion subscriptions come into play, and this can boost your repurchase rates. So this is how post purchase behavior is watched and it is pushed in a proper way. And finally, we arrive at behavioral decision theory. This is the framework to unravel all the chaos behind the decisions taken by customers. Like we discussed, there are heuristics and biases because you're already used to doing certain things in a way. Your brain thinks that this is the right thing, this is the way things are done. So you want to stick with that particular part, and in order to completely support that, it also creates certain frames. It puts things in a certain structure and says this happened, so this happened, so this happened, and therefore the logical flow is there set in the brain. So these are things which help understand people of how brains function and how people actually respond to stimuli. Examples of heuristics like we discussed was availability heuristic. For example, you have news impact on certain perceptions. That this particular product is going out of stock, buy now. You'll probably move towards buying it now. Then representativeness heuristic, here you're going to see base rate neglect. So for example, you're going to see certain stereotypes, and if you feel that this is not a particular product which is cut for my particular social status, you will tend to neglect it. Then there is a conjunction fallacy. Here you find that one thing leading into another is a reason why you should go for a particular brand or not go for a particular brand, and this is more than one single event which is causing it. So therefore there are chances that a couple of events happening in quick succession will push your brain to either take a decision or move out of it. And therefore the brain also frames certain things in a certain way, and marketers need to understand how they can use messaging, subliminal messaging, to push certain aspects that the brain receives better. So for example, if I'm going to talk about a certain cleaning liquid and I say twice the cleaning power, so then automatically the brain says whatever was the cleaning power, I don't know, it is a certain absurd number X, this has 2x power. Again, pricing wise, only pennies a day, you're not even spending anything. And then instead of saying 24-month warranty, you're saying a 2-year warranty. So the length in terms of the time span is something which people understand better in one way vis-a-vis the other. So that appeals to people's logic. People account for certain things and they put out these fallacies in a certain way. They segregate their gains, they highlight multiple benefits individually, they integrate losses, so they put all losses and club them together. They combine smaller losses with larger gains, so they tend to say that this is a smaller loss, but the gain was larger, so hence I'm all right with it. Then they segregate small gains with large losses. So if they gain small, again they say that this was a huge loss, but I only gained so much. So these are ways of people putting certain aspects in frames, and so therefore you have to talk to them along those lines. And here are the lessons for marketers. You leverage heuristics and framing to simplify the decision, use mental accounting insights and influence the spending behavior, and design messages that highlight benefits, minimize perceived losses, and frame comparisons effectively. So this is what the entire behavioral decision theory actually brings about. It brings about a lesson in simplicity. Couple of examples that we will close with today. One is Mayo Clinic. It is one of the largest serving medical institutions. They are a not-for-profit in the US, and their success is such that even US top brass and foreign heads of state come to them. Why? Because they use certain established design factors like Jack and Jill rooms. Now, Jack and Jill rooms are, you have a separate room for the examination and a separate room for the consulting, so that the spaces are segregated, people are more comfortable in the space where it is more personal and people can interact as if nobody is watching them, whereas it's the same person who has tested them and is giving them the answers. And physicians being salaried encourages collaboration and actually discourages competition. Surgeries often are scheduled within 24 hours, and so quick decision making helps save lives as such. So this entire thing runs from the whole aspect of motto, which is that best interest of the patient is the only interest that Mayo seeks to serve. So this is something which pushes people. In fact, there are lots of other things, like they are greeted, they are made very comfortable, and the building, the design, the walk, everything around Mayo is something which comforts people. And in a similar vein, you've got the Intuit financial strategies capabilities. Here, they have got a lot of products which create quick resolution in terms of tax returns and a variety of things. But what they have been actually being able to do better than competition is they've simplified the financial tracking with automated data entry and visual insights, and reduced the time to pay. What is time to pay? The time from when you've put in the data to the time when you've got the exact results that should give you the answers you're looking for. They're able to file taxes faster. Normal people are able to do it, and they don't need very heavy duty support from professionals to get it done. So it gives that emotional payoff. You put in less effort and you get faster refunds, because tax refunds are what people are after. And actually, word of mouth marketing drives 80% of the sales. So they have also integrated with Coinbase, and they've done a lot of things so that they are able to work for a faster response time. And this innovation and their keen eye on consumer insights and exceptional service is what is pushing them in the right direction. The next time around, we'll be discussing a couple of more case study based discussions and look at the business purchase flow of marketing purchase process. That will be for the next time around. Thank you for today's participation. That's all for today.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. We usually know William Shakespeare as the most revered figure in the history of English literature. But we often tend to forget that he has also been one of the most hated figures in literature. And here I'm not talking only about those boys and girls who have to memorize long sections from Macbeth or King Lear or Julius Caesar. before they can go and sit for their school or college exams, but I'm also talking about people who are themselves quite famous authors. Tolstoy, for instance, considered the writings of Shakespeare to be, and I quote, crude, immoral, vulgar, and senseless. George Bernard Shaw absolutely loathed Shakespeare, as he did Homer. But perhaps no other criticism about Shakespeare is more damaging than the one which says that Shakespeare is a marvelous storyteller, provided someone has told him the story earlier. Now, this piece of criticism is particularly damaging because it is true. None of Shakespeare's plays contain any original story whatsoever. They are all written using pre-existing materials, pre-existing stories. Now, does that diminish the stature of Shakespeare as a dramatist? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.